Good afternoon. Talks between the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Russia end without any progress, while food and water supplies in Mariupol are running dangerously low. I'm Lindy Fu. Thanks for joining us on ST Live. Now, sanctions and boycotts against Vladimir Putin and Russia continue to escalate, with many companies taking a firm stance against the invasion. Now, social media giants have also stepped in. Parent company of Facebook and Instagram, Meta platforms will allow users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers in the context of the Ukraine invasion. The social media giant has made a temporary change to its hate speech policy, according to internal emails to moderators. Meta is also temporarily allowing some posts that call for death to Russian President Vladimir Putin or Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in countries including Russia, Ukraine and Poland. Twitter and Facebook have removed posts from the Russian embassy in the United Kingdom about the bombing of a children's hospital in Mariupol. The posts in question go against the company's hateful conduct and abusive behavior policies related to the denial of violent events, according to the Twitter spokesman. Meanwhile, on the ground in Ukraine, the capital Kiev is bracing itself for a Russian onslaught. Satellite images show the Russian military convoy that was 60 kilometers long and stuck outside the city has broken up. The convoy appears to be fanning out into towns and forests near Kiev, with artillery pieces moving into firing positions. In the southern port city of Mariupol, some people have become so desperate that some have fought each other for food. Aid agencies warning that residents are facing an apocalyptic situation with no water, power or heat for more than a week, and all the shops and pharmacies were looted several days ago. We are into the third week of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's take stock of events so far. The Straits Times' associate editor Ravi Velloor joins us now. Ravi, as an expert commentator on macroeconomics and geopolitics, what are the key takeaways for you?
Key takeaways from this conflict will have to start with the tremendous resilience that the Ukrainians have shown in taking on this very formidable and very powerful military force that is the Russian army. The second takeaway would be the rather surprising, the evidence that of poor Russian planning and logistics operations. But at the same time, you have to be surprised at the Russian willingness to take casualties in this conflict. It's enormous. I mean, the very fact that they admitted taking 500 people, losing 500 lives and about 1,600 people wounded in the first 5 days of the conflict tells me their resolve to go through it. If you look back at what happened in Afghanistan, in 10 years of fighting, I think they lost about 13,000 troops. But here we're talking about losing 500 lives in 5 days. So I think it's a big takeaway. The fact that even the Russians admitted it is a surprise. You have to take that into account. But I also do think that the Russians are holding back quite a bit. I have not seen the full scale of the weapons available to them being deployed in this conflict. And I suspect that if this drags on, they might start using these weapons. And then you'll see the casualty count going up tremendously. It is fairly clear to me that the Russians are not going to stop until they have control of territory up and down the spine of Ukraine in a way, which to me is the Dnipro River. If you look at the map of Ukraine and, the capital Kyiv sits on the Dnipro River, I think the idea is to push towards the Dnipro and control it down the spine. And then that gives them the strategic comfort for the future and for negotiations. And of course, the refugee crisis has started in Europe. 2 million people, flowing out of Ukraine. I mean, they have to be housed, they have to be sheltered. It's a huge crisis in the hands of the Europeans. But there's another big lesson that I think we have to take note of, and that is how easily Mr. Putin proved to be a dupe. Why do I call him a dupe? Because I think he was baited into this conflict by the Americans, particularly by threatening all sorts of sanctions and saying he's going to attack now, he's going to attack on this day, that day, and all that. And he was put in a situation where it did look very weak if he had not moved in, and that he caved in. And clearly, he was not a man who was going to do that, but he took the bait, and I think it's proving very costly for him.
Okay, you wrote in your column yesterday about how India is looking to France to replace Russia and concluded with the old adage that in international relations, only interests are permanent, not friendships. So who do you think will benefit the most from this war in Ukraine?
I think there are two issues here. I mean, there's, of course, the Indian issue, and I think you're referring to the relationship with China, I mean, with the Russians, which we discussed in our last episode on this channel. But, if you want to talk about who's going to benefit the most from this war, I think you have to start by saying that the Americans have in a very good position at this point of time. They have achieved so much without firing a bullet, without losing a single life. And Putin has played right into American hands. The Americans have managed to get Europe united like they were never before. The Germans have agreed to rearm. There's a substantial increase in their defense spending, which they've announced. And, the icing on the cake for the Americans is that the first thing they announced is that they're going to buy the F-35. So it's not a surprise that if you care to look at the shares of American defense companies, I mean, they like to call them defense contractors, but they actually defense companies, military sales, their shares are booming. I mean, in the last month, I think some of these companies, their shares have risen almost a fifth. So clearly the war industry is going to boom, not just in America, but also in Europe. But there's another issue here, I think, which we need to take off, and I don't see many commentators taking note of it. And it is that Russian energy exports are going to be a huge issue. I don't know if you're aware that Russia controls fully a quarter of global gas reserves. And in the list of nations with oil reserves, they rank sixth. Now, if they get into sanctions, they're not able to use these energy exports. They had plans to quadruple oil production, for instance. And that was going to be the lever they had for their growth in the next 20 years. And, this is that 20-year window while fossil fuels are still in use around the world. And I suspect that Mr. Putin may have cashed a big check in that direction, in the sense that he's going to lose a lot of oil revenue, gas revenue, which would have been critical for his economy. And I think he is going to be denied that. And what's more, there's talk about the Americans supplying gas to Europe. It won't be done very easily. It'll take maybe till the end of the year, maybe next year they'll start doing it. But it comes at a time when the U.S. is a net energy exporter, and I'm sure it'll work very well for them ultimately.
Well, let's talk about loss of a different kind. We are seeing numerous images of the casualties of the war. Hundreds of civilians have died and millions are displaced. Should Ukraine surrender or make peace to end the war?
Lynn, that's really a very difficult question to answer, because I'll tell you why. It is not for us to question Ukrainian aspirations to defend their country, because that's what we do ourselves. And, we like to believe that we will defend this little country, or, all our friends would defend their countries to the last person. The Ukrainians are doing it, but the question is whether it is wise. We can have an assessment of it. I have a feeling at this point that there is something in their calculus that they believe that they might get outside support at some point. Although at this point, NATO has said that they're not going to interfere. But I just hope that they're not being led up the garden path in that belief, because I think they do have a choice of sitting down, I think, and talking to the Russians and, offering guarantees that could possibly help come to a conclusion. But I think there are outside players also who should get involved. I think it is time for NATO, for the European Union, and for the Ukrainians to try and get a meeting with Mr. Putin, because if something like that doesn't happen, I don't see the Russians backing off because they committed so much into this effort. And I fear that the war in Europe could widen if there's no solution soon.
Thank you very much for your insights, Ravi. Ravi Velloor, Associate Editor and Asia columnist of the Straits Times. Well, the effects of the Russian invasion are also being felt by football fans around the world, especially Chelsea fans. Chelsea Football Club's future is looking uncertain as the United Kingdom dramatically stepped up its sanctions against Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, the outgoing owner of Chelsea and a longtime ally of President Vladimir Putin. The club won't be able to sell new tickets for matches, including games in the European Champions League, and its merchandise stores will be closed. Player transfers are also banned, as are new contracts. Abramovich had put the Premier League club up for sale in anticipation of action against him, but because the club is among the assets frozen as part of the sanctions against him, its sale has now been stalled. Our coverage on the Ukraine crisis continues on straitstimes.com and on Facebook as well as YouTube. Don't forget to hit subscribe to stay informed and activate the bell icon on YouTube to catch live news updates. I'm Lin Li Fu. Thanks for watching.